Outstanding, Scotty.
Good morning. Are we bright and shiny?
It is good to see you. You're just looking healthier and healthier every time I see you with that glorious sunshine from Queensland giving you a glow.
Well, I'm
indoors, but I'm talking more about your just general level of energy.
Thank you. I'm in my new office. I actually now have sunshine through the day, so I can track daylight. I'm quite excited about this.
I have been sort of watching with a fair bit of jealousy the renovations and the changes that you're doing to your clinic, all that extra bloody room that you've got, while us Sydney people are stuck in tiny little clinics because the rent's too bloody high. Although you're paying a lot more rent than I am, so there's that. That does make me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, it doesn't make me feel all that good. It's just got to make it pay. I've got more new toys to try and help with that.
Fancy such as?
I just got the new BTRAX force balance plate has just arrived.
Interesting. Yep.
And we're going to be looking after having done, here's your plug, Brett, FNOR 6, absolutely magnificent course on whiplash, concussion, migraine. Mm-hmm. I've got some of the new toys coming specifically to look at doing a whole lot more concussion rehab, dysautonomia, and making use of my extra space that I have here.
And the BTRAX, is that something that was promoted by the FNOR? Because I know they've got their... there's a few different... what's the name of their big fancy suite? The Neuraxon.
Yeah. So BTRAX is not necessarily specifically promoted by FNOR, but some of the people who are involved with it have suggested this is quite a good... plate to be using. It appears to be accurate. It appears to be useful. It's capable of being transported to the sideline of a football game, and so you can do concussion assessment on the fly at the game. Someone has a head knock, we've got their baseline, we can have a look at them straight away. Whereas some of the other ones, like the CAPS machine, is kind of thought to be, certainly by some of the big people in our field, the granddaddy of all things, and it's certainly the most expensive, but it's also fundamentally the least portable, and it's hypersensitive to instability, which will throw every one of your measurements off, and so it's not really...
Doesn't lend itself to sport field side assessment.
And that's really... where I'm wanting to get into is a lot more of the helping, because there's no one doing concussion particularly well here in Brisbane for an on-the-fly assessment with football players. It's can you fill out this form, and the problem basically is that you can game those SCAT 5 forms. You can play it dumb at the beginning of the season, and therefore once you've had a head knock, you're actually running kind of at the same sort of level, so to speak, or you can try and remember them and actually learn the sorts of questions that they're going to be asking. And so you're not actually giving any true representation, because if you're being paid to play footy, you need to be on the field.
Yeah, memorise those questions. For the players at home, can you run through force plate and why measuring centre of mass and gravity and your sway parameters is an effective concussion test?
Well, not as well as some people can, I can guarantee you that.
Make it up, just say it.
Make it up, yeah, okay. So the human being, from my point of view, spends at least 60% of its energy on the brain, and of that, the majority is actually spent feeding commands through your axial structure, your spinal structure, legs, etc., to hold you upright, looking into the distance with your ears at 180 degrees from one another on the sides of your head, so that you've got the widest peripheral vision, the widest soundscape, and that you're looking forward, up, and into the distance. So if you've had a head knock, your ability to actually do that becomes very muted. And so for some people it'll be really bad, for some people it won't be as obvious. The force plate will actually measure really, really tiny fluctuations in those movements. So when you're you're standing upright, everybody sways. Now, there's a normal sort of sway pattern that's kind of a figure of 8 generally, or kind of a circle in one direction, circle in the other direction as the planet spins, that we're all meant to do. So when there's distress to the vestibular system of the inner ear or the cerebellum or some of your balancing mechanisms, we can get an aberrance, a misfiring of those neuromuscular patterns, and people can be kind of leaning funnily off to one side or trying to fall backwards and forwards, and they become very fixated in an aberrant movement pattern. So the idea is that if we take a baseline reading of these football players at the beginning of the season, and we know what their standard kind of sway is, and we can measure that, when we put them back on the plate and we're seeing a change, instead of doing this figure of 8, they're suddenly kind of wonking off to the left-hand side, constant sway, you can actually determine whether it's an injury in the structure, an injury to the vestibular system, and we can make determinations as to whether the person can actually perform within the certain parameters that the consensus statement has determined is appropriate. And you can make a call as to whether this person's just got a physical injury or a neurological injury at that particular moment in time. So
that was beautiful. What are you talking about? You're going to make it up. That was super succinct. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done. I think because the vestibular and brainstem cerebellar structures are your go-to measurements for concussion, just because the force that you put through your noggin makes that brainstem particularly susceptible to torsional style injuries, which is why you get that balance. Although I think from my experience, the general pop is sort of very aware of what happens to the thinking brain side of the equation from a concussion. You think you've got that, and there's that nice video of your brain looking like jelly, and you sway it back and forth, and it flips all over the place, and people go, "Oh yeah, that's bad." Most of the aberrant symptoms, like that brain fog and balance and disequilibrium, does come from lower structures, being brainstem.
And what's really cool that I learned, it's going to sound really obvious to you, and it was one of those of course sort of moments, but the instructors are standing there and they're starting to talk about whiplash, and the new consensus statement is all whiplashes cause concussion. And I old enough now, and I've been doing this long enough. I started training in '93, and whiplash was taught as like a musculoskeletal injury. You've yanked on the ligaments in the neck, the muscles are sore, the tissue's sore, and a concussion was a neurological disorder. The brain had been shaken about. But of course, no one's bothered to make it clear, because sadly, as most of us will do, we get taught something, so that's how we operate. So I was taught that that's separate from that, and not, the brain is connected to the dura, the meninges, which is connected directly to the skull and the upper vertebra. And so if you shake the neck and the skull with force, such as in a motor vehicle accident or football or otherwise, and whiplash yourself, you're going to yank on the brain.
Impossible to do one.
To not do it. As I say, I'm like sitting at that moment going, oh, of course, how stupid ever. And it just seems really clear. But my figuring is most of the people out there haven't connected the dots. The average population person who's sitting in their car and gets run up behind while they're sitting on, Coronation Drive here in Brisbane, or the Sydney Harbour Bridge, or something like that, and they get a mild kind of whiplash, and they go, oh yeah, my neck's just a bit sore. They're not taking on board the fact that that's actually a neurological compromise, and it could lead on to other problems. And so that's the other cool thing that came out of it, was the actual consensus statement on concussion gave us a bit more insight to what we're actually looking at, which is if the concussion itself, the whiplash leading concussion, or the torsional head twist that creates stress on the neurological structures, in an adult will last 2 weeks. Any symptoms occurring after that are now what are called post-concussive disorder or post-concussive syndrome. And like it's not concussion at that stage. A concussion is a discrete thing. It's the initial injury. It lasts 2 weeks in an adult, 4 weeks in a child, and anything going on after that is actually a separate and distinct thing, and it can be aggravated by underlying conditions such as migraine or depression or POTS. And we've really got to be very clear about that, as well as looking at what generally we're hunting for is, as you mentioned before, dysautonomia and negative impact on the brainstem and the areas that affect the gut, the heart rate, the respiratory rhythm, as well as the inputs towards people's personality. And we're not really giving enough attention to the fact that people will experience significant personality disorder, change in mood, change in behavior, post having a decent whiplash or head knock.
Well, I think that's also, I mean, people are becoming more and more aware of sort of gut being like a neurological component to gut, the vagus nerve and the brain-gut connection. But, if you get whiplash and you get that post-concussion syndrome, you don't necessarily have to have your classical hallmarks of a concussion being, brain fog and headache and blah, blah, blah.
No.
And you could get, I've got whiplash and now my guts are upset.
That's it.
Concussion. But this, whiplash and talking about concussion, that's a neat little segue into the other thing that I wanted to talk about being, you mentioned a term the other day and I didn't know what you were talking about. You said mitochondrial leakage, and I thought maybe you needed a tissue or something and you had some sort of problem going on. But
No.
But the other thought that I had on that is that you get some people where they have a little bit of whiplash and they just the neck pain, and then a tiny bit of whiplash and neck pain, tiny whiplash, neck pain, and then the fourth bit of whiplash, then they're finally getting that post-concussion syndrome. And it's analogous to, a boxer's only got so many times he can get hit in the face before he's getting concussion syndrome and a glass jaw. So I think
that's exactly it.
Part of the issue with that, people connecting the neurological component of whiplash to concussion, is that, compared to getting punched in the face, mild whiplash, from a force point of view, isn't quite as great. So it is taking more whiplashes to get to that concussion state in some people. But if you're getting 3 whiplashes and no problems, then people are sort of, you've got that tolerance to force until you don't, and then you really don't.
Yes, that's absolutely the case. And again, a lot of the brain fog is considered to be due to stuff like mitochondrial leakage. Now, mitochondrial leakage,
But bless you.
Yeah. It's the inappropriate parts of my brain kind of is just misconstruing it as something else. I can tell you.
It's Friday morning, buddy.
Yeah. But the mitochondria are the energy factories in every one of the cells. And so some cells might have, a few, 7, 100, etc. But neurological cells have, hundreds to thousands of mitochondria, and they're the factory that actually makes energy. Now, as part of that energy production, they actually shunt protons and electrons around. And basically, the movement of those things is what drives pumps in our body to produce ATP, which is the actual currency that all of our muscle cells, etc., use to actually do any work. So one of the beliefs is actually that the true definition of death is when the last enzyme in your last mitochondria actually stops producing ATP. It's kind of an interesting, creepy thought. But one of the interesting things behind this is, of course, that every mitochondria requires 4 iron molecules. And you'll keep hearing me harp on all the time about iron deficiency and how our diet and whether we're getting enough iron is actually getting into us. And one of the most basic reasons is that the protein structures in every one of the mitochondria require iron to actually make the enzyme work. So you cannot create a concentration gradient of protons and electrons to actually make your mitochondria work without the iron molecule being there. So, people on low iron diets are really susceptible to greater amounts of neurological fragility, if I could use such a word. post having head knock, concussion, whiplash. Now, the other sides of this is that the great theory of aging is currently being postulated by some in the field to be due to this thing called mitochondrial leakage. And basically, as you're trying to make energy and you don't have the buffers, the superoxide dismutase enzymes or catalase or otherwise, to soak up the free radicals that are being produced, you actually punch holes in your mitochondrial membrane, causing them to die. Now, when enough of your mitochondria basically rupture, it releases enough enzymes into the cytoplasm of that cell to start an apoptotic or programmed cell death to occur. So,
interesting.
This is one of the reasons.
The cellular aging or cellular death does come about from you start to run low on the amount of mitochondria that should be in each cell, and
sure,
you reach a point of no return, and then cell gets shut down.
Correct. That's exactly it. And so this is quite normal, except for if you have a massive increase in oxidative stress or a massive demand for energy production. This appears to go at a much greater rate. Now, we've spoken a bit about intermittent fasting and caloric intake. And as it turns out, intermittent fasting reduces the excess of energy that helps drive mitochondrial leakage. So if you have too much energy being created because you've got this massive influx of glucose going into the system and you're not doing enough neuromuscular work to actually burn it off, you have this buildup of concentration of free radicals that just punch holes in everything. And this is the suggested reason why people who are on a massively high carbohydrate caloric intake diet are actually at much greater risk of mitochondrial and therefore cellular aging, and why the intermittent fasting is shown to actually have a greater effect at decreasing aging in your system.
Interesting. So that's high-calorie diets. You're essentially driving the mitochondria to work super hard and then not burning off the energy that they're producing, which
correct
is causing the mitochondria to get holes punched in them and cellular death.
Yep. Now, in someone who, maybe is a Olympic distance triathlete or is a professional MMA fighter who's training 6-8 hours a day, they're probably going to be burning off enough of the energy from their high-calorie diet, and it probably is evening out. Okay, but then they have the,
see Michael Phelps in his 10,000 calorie day diet.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we're not seeing, and this is exactly what seems to be proving the concept, which is that if you're burning off enough, you can eat to some degree as much as you want. If you're the average house couch potato who's kind of telling Michael Phelps how he should swim harder, watching the Olympics, etc., sitting there chowing down on a pack of crisps where you've got fat and salt and kind of carbohydrate, therefore glucose going in, you're probably not going to do as well. This is going to build up a inappropriate level of free radicals, which punch holes in the membrane. And as soon as you start punching holes in the membranes, the protein structures that are embedded in them can't do their jobs properly, and everything starts to go wrong from there.
Yeah, interesting. So, we have talked in the past about another process that causes that sort of cellular death faster than it should happen, being that, and I say it wrong every single time. I've been trying to say it during the week properly, but I haven't. Glucosylation?
Glucosylation or glycation?
Glycation is much easier for me to say.
Yeah.
So where essentially excess sugar in the blood starts to coat cells too much.
Sure.
And then your body thinks that because of the amount of sugar molecules in that cell membrane that's an old cell and should die.
That's absolutely the case.
That process, being like a high blood sugar diet plus the mitochondrial seepage, seems like two potent mechanisms to kill yourself off pretty quickly.
That's exactly it. That's absolutely the case. And so this is kind of working or further kind of illustrating the concept that human beings have generally been in a boom-bust high energy output cycle, meaning that we would be walking a lot on a daily basis, climbing, pulling, fighting, doing things, and that we wouldn't necessarily always have large amounts of food. And so by having some food today and then not having some for 3 days, we were never allowing our energy patterns to build up so much as to drive the apoptosis either from cellular leakage or from the glycation.
So it's just the period of plenty that we're living in that's highlighting this mechanism that's never been from an evolutionary point of view, put to the test.
As you've heard me speak about also, there is cellular epigenetic phenotypes that are G6PC2s, and these people do really poorly on fasting diets because their cortisol level goes up far too high as soon as their blood sugar starts to drop. So they're what I kind of consider the exception to this particular statement. And there's not really any specific research actually looking at the mitochondrial leakage versus this phenotype or that phenotype, and it'd be really nice to see whether if you've got a different epigenetic structure, whether it's going to affect you more or less. If there's any researchers out there listening, I'd really like to know the answer to that so we can talk about it in the future.
There's phenotypes and mitochondria, and intermittent fasting.
Everyone's kind of currently like, oh yeah, it's the greatest thing. But I've got patients that can't do it to save themselves because of that G6PC2. Their personality devolves too much. But
they get hangry. And then
that's exactly it. Yeah. And then they get breakdown.
Damn it, I'm eating something.
This kind of continues with the mitochondrial leakage. Someone with concussion who's, basically stressed all the time tends to be hunting for a higher degree of carbohydrate in their diet because the carbohydrates release serotonin. Now, serotonin is a really interesting neurotransmitter at this moment in time because it affects some really important neuronal pools in the upper part of the brainstem, in the midbrain or mesencephalon. And one of the areas that it affects is the periaqueductal gray, both there and descending down the spinal cord. And that area helps stop pain, and so if you don't have enough serotonin, you can't turn pain off, and these people will commonly be suffering with headaches and aches and pains all over the place. Further, the neuronal pools that stabilize eye movements, horizontal or otherwise, are also in that brainstem area and require serotonin. So if you've got unstable eye movement, you're going to be taking your serotonin from your periaqueductal gray or from your personality spot, and you're going to be trying to feed it into your eye neuronal pools. Now, we know that serotonin gets released by eating carbohydrates and sugar. So if you're struggling to maintain personality, decrease pain, and keep your eyes on the horizon, what are you going to be hunting for?
Get that sugar.
Yeah. So as that sugar builds up and you physically can't do the output to actually keep your system balancing out that equation, what you're going to do is induce more mitochondrial leakage, which will cause apoptosis, which will cause a destruction in your energy field, and the low energy is shown to induce a sensation of brain fog.
That's
isn't that cool?
Fascinating from the point of view of SSRIs and depression.
Oh yeah,
so if you've got depression and you're driving your serotonin, so it's okay, let's feed that serotonin pool, and then anyway, that's you don't have the motivation to get up and do something to burn off that energy, further driving the
There's a particular drug that they tend to give for stopping nausea, especially in these concussion situations. So commonly, because of the brainstem distress and the vagal nerve component of it, they give out what's the name of it?
Stemitol or something?
Stemitol. There you go, Stemitol.
Hey, you're welcome, buddy.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Stemitol is a DRD2 inhibitor. So the Stemitol itself action appears to be on the inhibition of dopamine in the dopamine delta 2 pathway. Now, most people aren't going to know what that actually means, but the delta 2 pathway for dopamine is actually the inhibitory pathway. And so it allows go-no-go activity and the ability to train a new pathway out. So if you inhibit your ability to run that pathway, you cannot actually adapt your vestibular mechanism to a new stability. So taking Stemetil is going to screw up your ability to stabilize yourself in the long term and get out of Dodge. So for all those people out there, you've really got to kind of ask the GPs, etc., that you're working with, don't prescribe this. You know, I know these people's nausea.
Yeah, trying to stabilize and rehab your vestibular system while you're on something that's actively working against it. That's got to be a good combo.
Correct. Not going to work.
Hey, let's spiral back or cycle back to mitochondria. So let's say that I am a fanny fat, and I mean, I'm not. If you've seen me, I'm in amazing shape.
You're glorious.
But you're on your standard Western diet. I've got mitochondrial leakage, and I've got the glycosylation. Yeah, I said it right. So basically cellular death. Now, I'm saying this knowing full well that you've got all of the toys at your disposal to fix this, but as the average punter, how do I fix it, Scotty? How do I get my mitochondria healthier and stop this leakage?
Oh, that's a really good point. So from a dietary perspective, I would be looking at altering towards more of what we look at as a classic Mediterranean diet. Now, a classic Mediterranean diet is quite whole food based. It's a lot more fresh. We're aiming for about 51% of your food as raw or fresh, preferably as green leafy vegetables, you know, aubergine, peppers, the collard greens, etc. You're basically trying to keep the sugars out completely. Alcohol is gone. Now, in all of these situations, I want to be really, really, really clear. There is no place for alcohol in any whiplash, mitochondrial dysfunction, or concussion situation. Although people are going to think, oh, but I feel a bit better, it is going to worsen every part of the problem. So just putting that out there. Yeah, absolutely. So other things that we need to be looking at is increasing lipid membrane stabilizers. Now that includes your omega-3 fish oils, your phospholipids, so foods that are going to be high in choline, which is including eggs, things that have lecithin granules in it to try and get phospholipids in that way. And we're going to try and actually make new neuronal membranes at that particular point in time. We have to be maintaining their metabolic output, so low levels of physical activity, and you basically are going to exercise them to the tolerance of their heart rate monitor. So as soon as you do, like, say you do 3 minutes of exercise and they're fine, and they're running at their normal average heart rate, and then they get to the 4th minute and suddenly it starts running away, well, great. You know that you're going to be exercising them for 3 minutes at a time up until you start seeing, you know, stability coming in some of their other neuronal outputs. Because as soon as you start pushing for energy, and you need more, and you can see that with that autonomic shift, they're going to start punching holes in their mitochondrial membranes again, and everything starts getting worse. So you've got to give enough physical exercise to keep something going, but not so much as to shift them into an autonomic dysfunctional state, because that means cortisol and adrenaline comes in.
Exercise to stimulate, not overload.
Correct. And so again, one of my favorite things for that is alpha GPC, as we briefly spoke about earlier this week. Enjoyed the golf clap. That was awesome.
I thought I found something that Scotty missed. Nope, he's already covered it. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Alpha GPC is a really, really clever nutrient. It's essential for making phospholipids, for one thing. Now, phospholipids are cell signaling devices and membrane stabilizers. So they make up the outside lipid bilayer of every one of the cells, especially in neurons and the axons and dendrites. So there's very specialized ones, and we're not going to get into too much detail. But suffice to say is some of their really important properties is that they seal up membranes, and those membranes include both the gut lining as well as the blood-brain barrier, as well as making the outside neuronal membranes, and they go into making the inner and outer membranes in the cells, including the mitochondrial envelopes.
Essential for cellular repair.
Yeah, basically. Now, what it also is shown to do is reduce the release of adrenaline in the system. Now, for every molecule of adrenaline that gets released, and that was one of the other reasons why we had you taking it originally, was because you were under a fair degree of load.
Running on adrenaline, yeah.
Yeah, and you can't heal if you're running on adrenaline. This is going to help keep shunting you into a fight-flight scenario. So we've always got to be pulling these people into a rest-digest phase. Now, acetylcholine is made from choline, which is in the glycerophosphocholine. So to make the neurotransmitter, you've got to provide sources of choline to help make the neurotransmitter. So it's one of the things that actually helps blunt that hyperactive fight-flight response and helps keep your memory operating effectively.
Good from a whole bunch of angles.
Absolutely it is. And so that was one of the things in your instance that I was looking at originally when we started putting you on it. But it's essential in these brain fog, hyperstress, mitochondrial leakage situations because it has so many fingers into so many pies to help the system actually improve itself.
Yeah,
not the least improving testosterone if you've got problems with your 5-alpha reductase.
Yeah, I thought I found you on that one, but no, too clever for me, Scotty.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far, but
but then to tie into we've got supplements, diet to help with the mitochondrial aging process. Let's talk about laser therapy, hyperbarics, and cryotherapy.
Sure,
because
absolutely.
So amazing tools for it.
They're absolutely. So in all of these instances, especially with someone who's got mitochondrial leakage, energy loss, concussion, all of these things, according to the literature, are shown to be improved by hyperbaric. Okay, so low-level hyperbaric oxygen chambers at like 1.3 atmospheres are shown to help reduce neurological inflammation and oxidative stress. So, the top researchers in the field are pointing this out, and they're using oxygen as a therapy, using like different durations of time. And again, we can put someone in there and monitor their pulse oximetry. It should be at 99, 100 while sitting in an oxygen chamber. And what we should also see is that their heart rate stabilizes and goes down as they become more pressurized with more oxygen, and the repetitive use of it, so time after time after time, like 40 sessions, 100 sessions, etc., is being used for people with severe neurological compromise. Similarly, like most of this work has come out of research from deep sea divers who had severe neurological dysfunction post getting the bends and coming up and having problems with their nitrogen in the bloodstream. And so they've then kind of looked at different pressures and found that for most situations of neurological compromise and neurological inflammation that isn't caused by severe nitrogen compromise from deep sea diving, 1.3 atmospheres is generally the best for that low-level neurological compromise. But what most people don't understand with it is that it takes a long time. Okay, so again, you're going to feel a bit better after 1 or 2 sessions. Oh, look, I feel good. But it's the timely repetition week after week after week, building up for like 40 weeks, that is shown to increase capillary bed vascularity in the brain and actually supply the tissue with more oxygen. And that's one of the genetic effects that it's shown. So most of the effect of hyperbaric is actually done in an epigenetic genetic fashion by triggering you to make new capillary pathways and increase protein release in the brain to actually stabilize the neurons themselves. So I was kind of surprised. I thought it was just the oxygen, but what it's shown is that oxygen acts to stimulate the genes to actually make new neuronal pathways.
Yeah, fascinating.
Okay, so that's one of my absolute favorites because apart from someone who's got sinusitis, they're full up and their ears won't kind of pressurize, depressurize, there's no risk. You can't harm someone by giving them oxygen. Oxygen's essential for life. So if you stick them in and they've got ear problems, well, don't.
Yeah.
Don't. But or in actual truth to that. Yeah, even then, if they've got, also the other one is a collapsed lung, they're not going to do very well at that particular moment in time.
If you've got pneumothorax,
don't do that. So otherwise, though, you oxygen, like compressed oxygen, you can get oxygen condensers. That might be another way of getting it into them and increasing their oxygen levels. And what it's shown to do is hyperbaric is shown to help reduce reperfusion injury in some of these situations, especially post-stroke, post-concussion, etc. By keeping the tissue saturated, the cells keep operating in a oxygen-dependent fashion rather than an anoxic state, and they don't have the drive for mitochondrial leakage. And that's one of the big things that actually drives the mitochondrial leakage is when it's operating in a low oxygen environment and not doing oxidative respiration. So other things that I use, obviously I'm a great fan of laser, and I've got both class 2 and class 4 lasers, and we've absolutely found that light therapy is therapeutic, and it's shown to reduce inflammation and induce blood supply and oxygenation to tissue. It's shown to stimulate neuronal pathway reconnections and neuronal growth, and again it's shown to do this at a genetic epigenetic level, apart from just driving oxygenated blood. Because again, if we think about the thermomolecular effects, if you put specific frequencies of light into the bloodstream, a red light will stimulate the red cells to actually speed up their spin, which increases their activity, and you can actually drive more oxygenated blood to areas that you're wanting. Now, can you do it specifically? Probably not. I'm not going to say, you put it there and you're absolutely going to see. No, we can't prove that at this moment in time. But what we do know is that when you're doing it, it drives oxygenated blood to tissue. And this seems to be what helps drive the cellular and functional changes in people to heal much, much quicker. And again, from just physical injury, the research shows that you can chop a sprain down by at least a third to a half in its healing time by utilizing cold laser on it. I think that's pretty cool. And my other favorite toy is, of course, my new cryotherapy chamber. Boom.
Going well?
I love it. It's if not for the fact that I got scammed on the first one, and
that was a saga in itself.
Oh, it's still ongoing. Yesterday we started applying with the courts for default judgment against the company and the individual that I'm suing. And can I say, one of the people involved, the founder of the company, is just lost his appeal against being a convicted rapist. So,
not looking good, buddy.
It's not looking good for anyone in there. It's not looking good for me, because that may mean that he's got zero money to pay me back for scamming me. But the new machine is absolutely better. And again, cryo is shown to have a epigenetic effect. It's in a similar fashion to like fasting does, of driving down inflammation and increasing your sirtuin gene activation to actually stop mitochondrial leakage. Now, I can't sit here and pretend that I can tell you every one of the pathways that it's doing, but that's the research effect that seems to be coming out at this moment in time.
From the neurological support, that's the main one that we're interested in.
That's absolutely the main one. Now, again, if you've got significant issues with blood pressure, especially low blood pressure, probably not the greatest tool. I wouldn't necessarily use it in those people.
So
you'd want to get a bit more.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, you could do it at lower temperature. So again, my machine will go up to or down to minus 170. So you could take them down to minus 70 and hold them there for a period of time and use kind of warm cold, so to speak.
Yeah,
It's still going to feel cold, but you're not going to put them on the same degree of stress. And then you can go to 75. And because my machine is really, you can dial in 5-degree temperature differences. And so I can hold it at 75 or 110 or whatever. We can actually cold stress someone to actually create cold heat adaptation. Now, it's absolutely going to drive the release of endorphins into the system. It's going to change vascular flow because you go from 25 degrees to, say, minus 100 and, 25 degrees. So there's a 150 degree differential, and then back out again. You're going to have your blood supply go from your tissue to your core and back out again. And this causes a sensation of euphoria. And, after this machine, I had a patient go through. It was one of the very first ones with the new machine. And I adjusted her afterwards. And while she was sitting there telling me about what had been going on, she said, I feel high. And she just had this kind of happy, surprised, quizzical look on her face. She said, not like coffee high,
but proper high.
Like, yeah. And just it was the most awesome thing. It stuck with me. And so shout out to Trish. Yeah. So if you're listening, this is you. You know it. It was really cool.
Mate, that's so. In summary, because I've got to start tying this out. I've got a patient coming in soon. Mitochondrial leakage. So that's going to be present in anyone with low energy levels, running on adrenaline, concussion, post-exercise soreness, chronic pain. Like it's going to be a factor in any sort of problem.
It's a factor.
Yeah.
Full stop. Everyone gets some degree of it. The issue is not that they get it, it's that they get more than they can contain and deal with. And this is where the tissue injury and the rupture, like from a head knock, becomes a big issue because you've lost blood supply to the area, you've now operating in an anoxic state, and you're going to get the increase in free radicals being created that you can't actually stop appropriately. That's going to actually damage more of the membranes. And when more of them hit past that point of no return, it's all off for those cells. And so you get this cascade of damage. And so in a stroke situation or what's shown in concussive situations is there's the focal point of injury and impact and damage. And then there's like a halo around it. And that keeps expanding the more low oxygen the person becomes. So the more you stress the person, the more that halo expands and you get more damage through the tissue. As I say, that's absolutely critical in stroke, and people like the surgeons, the neurosurgeons, etc., say, like seconds count in those moments. Again, hyperbaric is shown to actually make a real big impact on it because it stops that reperfusion injury. Because if you go too long without the oxygen because the clot wasn't taken out soon enough or you didn't get clot busters in, then that cascade of damage just spreads and spreads and spreads. So if you've squeezed the oxygen into the tissue, the tissue stays operating at a aerobic capacity, and you just don't get the cascade of damage going in.
Yeah, brilliant.
So
mitochondrial combined with laser therapy to promote mitochondrial health.
Yeah,
diet,
absolutely.
Alpha GPC and cryotherapy as the cherry on the top is how you're going to slow down or as much as possible that mitochondrial aging.
Dysfunction. Yep, absolutely. And then, of course, you are going to, once you've got their metabolic stability going, then you do your neurological rehabilitation and try and actually get those pathways to start to renew themselves so they can resume a full and functional life again. And there's never a moment that we don't want to give credit to, neurological rehabilitation, especially people like the Carrick Centre who've bought us a whole bunch of this stuff, and the people at FNOR. But again, I strongly point out that lots of the practitioners out there doing rehab probably aren't looking effectively enough at the metabolic capacity of the patients that they're flirting with, and they're actually driving dysfunction because the people do not have the blood supply, oxygen, or energy to actually make these things stick.
Yeah, that's a excellent point. Mitochondrial health is key.
Absolutely.
Mate, that's
Right.
that was beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, and next session, mate. What do you want to talk about?
Well,
Give people
look.
a teaser.
Give people a teaser. Well, let's talk about boobs.
All right,
I know you're very interested in boobs, and
We'll say I have a long-term fascination. Yeah, that would be fair.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about some bacteria in relationship to them and some of the interesting things that are occurring in microbiomes and fecal transplants and obesity and some stuff like that.
Beautiful. I love it. Boobs and obesity. It's a good topic. All right, mate.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, mate. Brilliant.
Thank you for watching. To learn more from Dr. Scott, visit our site at optihuman.com.au.